In 1917, 9 out of 10 men who showed up to a costume party in America arrived dressed the same way. Bowler hat, toothbrush mustache, cane, oversized shoes pointed outward. They were not dressed as a fictional character from a book or a play. They were dressed as a film character who had existed for 3 years. A character one man had invented, controlled, and performed entirely on his own terms. That man was Charlie Chaplin. And what he built around that costume was not just a career. It was an empire. This was not popularity. This was standardization. One man had created a character so precise that millions of people could reproduce it without ever being told how. And the man who built it started with nothing. Chaplin was not supposed to control anything. He was born into poverty in London in 1889, the kind that removes options before you even understand what options are. His father was absent. His mother struggled to hold work and eventually lost her grip on reality entirely. By the age of 9, Chaplin had already been sent to a workhouse twice. He started performing on music hall stages as a child, not out of ambition, but out of necessity. By the age of 14, he was touring professionally. By the age of 19, he had joined the Fred Karno Company, one of Britain's most successful comedy troupes, performing across the UK and eventually in the United States. It was on one of those American tours in 1913 that a Keystone Studios director named Max Sennett saw Chaplin perform and offered him a film contract. Chaplin accepted. He arrived at Keystone with no experience in front of a camera and within a year had become the studio's most popular performer. The Tramp appeared for the first time in February 1914 in a short film called Kid Auto Races at Venice. Chaplin assembled the costume that morning from pieces he found in the dressing room. Pants that were too large, a jacket that was too small, oversized shoes worn on the wrong feet, a bowler hat, a cane, and a small mustache drawn on with grease paint. The character that emerged was not planned in advance. It was improvised. But every decision Chaplin made about that character from that point forward was completely deliberate. The Tramp was a man with no money, no status, and no country, but he carried himself like a gentleman. He was physically small but never intimidated. He moved through scenes that were built to humiliate him and found ways to turn every situation to his advantage. Audiences worldwide recognized something in that character that crossed every language barrier because the Tramp did not speak. He did not need to. Every emotion Chaplin communicated was physical, precise, and earned. Chaplin described his method simply. He would start with a vague idea, repeat it until it became funny, and keep refining until nothing could be cut. Every movement of every actor on his sets was demonstrated by Chaplin first. If he could have operated every piece of equipment himself, his assistant said, he would have. He wrote the scripts, directed the scenes, performed the lead role, composed the scores, and edited the final cuts. He was his own writer's room, his own director, his own producer. There was no committee. There was one vision. If you want to understand how one man controlled an entire film industry from the inside, subscribe now. What he built next is where the empire becomes real. That level of control was not possible within the standard studio structure of the 1910s. Studios owned their talent. They set the schedules, controlled the budgets, and took the profits. Chaplin spent his early years moving between studios, including Keystone, SNA, Mutual, and First National, extracting higher fees and more creative freedom at each stop. By 1918, he had built his own physical studio on La Brea Avenue in Hollywood, constructed specifically to fulfill his First National contract on his own terms. But owning a building was not enough. Chaplin wanted to own the distribution. In January 1919, alongside Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, and director D.W. Griffith, he co-founded United Artists. The studio was unlike anything Hollywood had produced before. It was founded not by businessmen or investors, but by the talent itself. Each film distributed through United Artists would stand on its own. No block booking, no studio packaging inferior films alongside successful ones. An executive at an existing studio reportedly said, upon hearing the news, that the lunatics had taken over the asylum. He meant it as an insult. Chaplin framed it on the wall. United Artists gave Chaplin something no contract had ever provided: complete creative autonomy over every project, from the first idea to the final release. The first film he produced under that arrangement was The Kid in 1921. It ran 68 minutes, longer than anything Chaplin had made before. It combined physical comedy with a story about an abandoned child being raised by a man with nothing. The film made $5 million worldwide. It was the second highest grossing film of the year. Buster Keaton was working in the same period. So was Harold Lloyd. Both were exceptional. Both built careers on physical precision and audience instinct. But neither of them controlled their own production and distribution simultaneously. Keaton handed control to a system. Chaplin built one. When Keaton signed with MGM in 1928, he lost control over his own work. The studio restructured his films, dictated the process, and the work suffered. Chaplin watched it happen, and he never made the same mistake. What Chaplin understood, and what the studios had not yet accepted, was that the Tramp was not a product they could replicate. The character worked because the same person who performed it also built every scene around it. The joke economy, the way each physical gag was constructed, timed, and paid off, was inseparable from Chaplin's control over the entire production. When sound arrived in 1927, every silent star in Hollywood faced a version of the same problem. Most adapted. Chaplin refused, not out of stubbornness, but out of a specific calculation. If the Tramp spoke English, the global audience would shrink to an English-speaking one. The character's power was its silence. So Chaplin made City Lights in 1931 as a silent film, while every other studio in Hollywood was racing towards sound. He composed the score himself. Albert Einstein attended the Los Angeles premiere. The film was a critical triumph. He did the same with Modern Times in 1936. The Tramp navigated factory floors, unemployment, and police violence without a word of dialogue. It was the last film in which the character appeared. Chaplin retired the Tramp in the final scene, walking down a road toward the horizon, and never brought him back. By the late 1940s, Chaplin's political views had made him a target. He was accused of communist sympathies during the Red Scare, and in 1952, while traveling abroad, his re-entry permit to the United States was revoked. He settled in Switzerland and did not return to America for 20 years. In 1972, he came back to accept an honorary Academy Award. The standing ovation lasted 12 minutes. The bowler hat, the cane, the mustache were assembled one morning in 1914 in a studio dressing room. They became the most recognized image in the history of film, not because a studio manufactured it, but because he controlled it. Everyone else worked for the industry. Chaplin made the industry work for him.